Hello and good morning, everybody. It's me, Julian, and today I thought I'd make a short video explaining how you can think dialectically, which is to say, how we can approach the dialectic, the Hegelian dialectic in particular, as a hermeneutic model, as a mode of thought, if you will. And my goal in this video is to give you a step-by-step guide, an easy explanation of how you can use the dialectic as an interpretive framework that can be quite useful and I think illuminating in your own life. Now, in yesterday's video, I talked about what the dialectic is not, which is to say it is not a system, nor is it a method. It's not a Hegelian totalizing system, nor is it a Marxist method of deducing or anticipating world revolution. Instead, as we know it today, the dialectic is essentially an interpretive framework that we can use to analyze the world around us. In fact, yesterday I was reading My Hero Academia, the manga, and I discovered a dialectical mechanism in the plot structure, which is to say the villain, who has the power, known in the series as a quirk, of all for one, creates his own nemesis, the superhero, one for all. Here we have a basic dialectical mechanism. Or The Acolyte, the new Disney show. At the end of episode 1, we see the villain saying that in order to eliminate the Jedi, you can't simply fight against them. Instead, you have to kill the dream. You have to defeat them from within. You have to turn the Acolyte against the Master. Once again, we have here a dialectical mode of thought and articulation. And so what I'd like to do in this short video is give you a step-by-step introduction to the basic mechanisms of the dialectic and how you can use it as an interpretive framework in your own life. And I promise you, you'll start seeing dialectics in everything. So Hegel's definition of the dialectic is that he likens it to speculative thought, or as he puts it, the unity of opposites, counting the negative as a positive. And this is very abstract, but one of the key mechanisms of the dialectic for Hegel is known as sublation, or Aufhebung. And Aufhebung has at least a couple of definitions in German. It is to lift something up, it is to cancel or eliminate something, but it is also to proliferate or save something, to preserve it. In fact, to go back to My Hero Academia, in the power all for one, we have this very sublation. We have a power which allows the supervillain to appropriate others' powers, thereby eliminating them and changing their nature. But he can also pass them on to others. He can proliferate them. Here we have the basic mechanism of Hegelian Aufhebung, or sublation. And for Hegel, sublation is the key identifier of all dialectics. For example, Hegel talks about the assassination of Caesar. This was meant to preserve the Republic, i.e. the senators believed that Caesar was the main antagonist to the Republic. And yet, in killing Caesar, they brought about the very thing they feared, namely Caesarianism, thereby ending and eliminating the Republic. Here we have, once again, sublation, namely that which was supposed to preserve the Republic ended up eliminating it. It returned in its opposite guise. Or think about one of Hegel's main influences, theology, namely how Christ on the cross is both particular, mere man, but also the Son of God, i.e. God. Here we have Hegel's formulation of what dies on the cross is not just the body of Christ, it is the God of the beyond, which is to say, God must fall into man so that man might be arisen and reunited back with God. Therefore, Christ on the cross and his elevation is therefore synonymous with his descent. Thereby, God's descent into the world of mere mortal man is thereby also his preservation, his resurrection in the Trinity. Here we have, once again, the dialectic, a dialectical unfolding that hinges upon this moment of sublation or Aufhebung. Therefore, whenever you encounter something that contains these three elements of something being transformed, eliminated, and proliferated, you have therein what is most likely a dialectical mechanism. Now, a useful way to think about the dialectic is actually to think about Engel's three laws of the dialectic. And if you apply these three laws, you can probably identify them in multiple films and politics and your analysis of the world. And these three laws are as follows. 1, the unity of opposites, which we talked about before. 2, the transition from quantity into quality and vice versa. And 3, the negation of negation. Now, the transition of quantity into quality is something that Aristotle already articulated, borrowing from the pre-sophists with the paradox of a heap of sand. With a heap of sand, you have a process by which individual grains of sand, when accumulated, suddenly become a heap. And yet, it's really hard to determine at exactly what point it goes from being simply sand to a heap of sand. Vice versa, how many grains do you have to take from the heap until it becomes mere grains of sand? Here we have what is known as the transition from quantity to quality and vice versa. Now, why is this important for dialectics? Well, Hegel applied this basic idea to the Kantian formalist framework, which is to say, the Kantian inquiry, the Kantian idealist turn, is to say, how can we deduce from particular subjective thought the universal substance of essence? And Kant, of course, believed that this was impossible, that subjective reason was itself the barrier to essence. Hegel essentially problematizes this by saying it's like the heap of sand, which is to say it's not about deducing the relationship between quantity, particular substance, versus the universal quality. Instead, it is about deducing the imminent impossibility of quantity as quality and quality as quantity, the heap of sand. To give you another example, let's say that you're losing your hair, that you're going bald. First, you're losing particular hairs, but at a certain point, even though you still have hair, you have acquired the quality of being bald. Therefore, Hegel brings into dialectical relationship the particular and the universal, and no longer seeks to separate them, the Kantian empirical formal model, but instead tries to identify the purely speculative nature, namely the subjective nature, as to their own identity, being each other's immanent negation. Finally, we have the category of the negation of negation, which is perhaps the one that you will find most readily when you start analyzing the world. Hegel's basic assumption was that everything led to a negation which itself was negated. Let's say that you're battling Pokemon for a moment, right? You're a Pokemon master and you're using your Pokemon to fight other Pokemon. Here we have negation. And yet at a certain point, this battle leads the Pokemon to evolve. He becomes a different Pokemon. Here we have the negation of negation. In other words, the negation of negation isn't simply the process by which something reduces into nothing, but instead how negation itself creates a positive affirmative category, what Hegel would call determinate negation. Therefore, the evolution of the Pokemon already lies within the Pokemon, but can only be unlocked by means of its battle with another. This basic mechanism was already articulated by Plato in his category of the dialectic. For Plato, the dialectic was when two points of view battled in a debate, as it were. Two opposing points of views between the speaker and the interlocutor had to go back and forth so that a higher mode of thought might be synthesized, so that a higher conclusion might be reached. In other words, the mistakes, the logical fallacies of the interlocutor, for Plato, the enemy of the sophist, were necessary so that true logic might be articulated. Once again, for Hegel, we have to get our hands dirty. We can't simply step back and logically deduce the idealist categories of essence and appearance. Instead, the very positing of such categories is already irreducible to the unfolding of said categories. In other words, for Hegel, the negation of negation is how we must count in our own subjective stance, not as a Kantian irreducible barrier, but precisely as the key, as the solution to the very unfolding of what Hegel called spirit, or a higher form of knowing. And you'll find examples of this throughout history, throughout pop culture, throughout perhaps even your own life. And so if you apply the basic mechanisms of the Hegelian dialectic as an interpretive framework, as a hermeneutic method, you will unlock all manner of dialectical patterns in the world around you, thereby, I believe, gaining a better and more rewarding knowledge of them. Thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.